Welcome back. It is time again for Silver and Black today, an Odyssey original podcast covering your Las Vegas Raiders. If you don't already subscribe to the show, please do us a favor. And wherever you get your audio, go ahead, subscribe, put on the auto download so you never miss an episode. We appreciate you being with us here. I am Scott Gulbransen, your host. My co-host is Mr. Moe Moton. He is a national NFL writer over at Bleacher Report, also Raiders columnist, which we'll get into today at sportsnot.com. And this is the Thursday edition. Just a real quick rundown of the show today, what we got on tap. We have the Carr Wars return. We'll talk about that. But first, we'll talk about Josh Jacobs. Again, yes, all the drama that's fit for the Shield is back, so we'll talk about that. Segment 2, we're going to talk about Mo's column up on Sportsnot right now about 3 Raiders veterans who might be on the hot seat. They got something to prove, and we actually talked about all 3 of them before on the last show, but I'll let Mo frame that for you. And then in the final segment, we will get to our Raider Nation mailbag. Okay, Mo, let's jump into the first subject of today's show, which is Josh Jacobs. We know that we saw Tom Pelissero was on the NFL Network, talked about Josh Jacobs and the fact that he could miss the start of training camp if a long-term deal isn't reached. Of course, they have a couple more weeks to do that, so all is not lost. If you're worried about Josh Jacobs, they have until the 15th or 17th. I think it's like that. But for those of you watching us on YouTube, I'm just showing a story here from Tyler Sutherland talks about it. But Pelissero said, hey, the one running back situation that nobody's talking about is Josh Jacobs. At this point, if there's not a long-term deal, I don't anticipate Josh Jacobs being there at the start of training camp. And I don't even know if he shows up for week 1. So that's Pelissero, who, of course, is NFL Network insider, so he gets some inside skinny from people in the organization and agents and all that jazz. But Mo, we've talked about this. You talked about this. The realistic possibility that Josh Jacobs is not there for training camp. I think we're starting to see. We've seen the cryptic tweets. We've heard sort of what he's said that way, at least. This is probably a negotiating tactic, but he's taking the kind of strong arm piece of this thing here, right? So what do you think about what's going to happen here?
Well, clearly Tom Pelissero doesn't listen to our show because we've been talking about it almost at the top of, or at some point in every one of our shows, we've talked about Josh Jacobs and the possibility of him holding out or holding in, as I called it. Holding in would be showing up to camp and not participating in team activities or drills, as some players did last few off seasons players have done. And that's to avoid the fines. So just to clarify what holding in is, players reporting to training camp to avoid the fine of not showing up, but protesting their current contract situation by not participating. I think that's the route that Josh Jacobs takes. Now, the holdout thing doesn't surprise me. When he said he may not even show up for week 1, this will remind people of the Le'Veon Bell situation with the Pittsburgh Steelers in 2018, I believe it was. I don't actually think Josh Jacobs takes that far where he misses an entire season, but I think it's a real possibility that if a deal isn't reached by July 17th, that there is going to have a situation where they could not have Josh Jacobs for the entire summer, but I think he'll eventually come in, or I shouldn't say come around, but I think he'll eventually rejoin the team, because right now, running backs aren't a tough spot. They're not getting paid. The highest paid running back this offseason from free agency was Miles Sanders. He's making under $6.5 million a year. So unless Dalvin Cook signs a significant deal, now there was a report that came out yesterday that Dalvin Cook has multiple offers on the table and he will sign a significant deal. If Dalvin Cook signs a deal that's more than the franchise tag, that's Josh Jacobs' best hope to get a bigger contract out of the Raiders, or to get some leverage. Or if Saquon Barkley signs a contract with the Giants, that's very lucrative, because the reports are that the Giants have resumed talks with Saquon Barkley on a new deal. So those are 2 good pieces of news for Josh Jacobs if he wants a big contract.
It's interesting, though, Mo, because I think if you look at this situation and you look at the fact that, to your point, the dominoes have to fall, so to speak, right, for Josh Jacobs. The dominoes have to fall for him, especially when it comes to these other running backs, because you talked about the market and what's happening there. And so for me, I look at it this way. Again, I think when you're having a fan conversation, fans, pay the guy, he's worth it, he's best running back in the NFL. And we've talked about ad nauseum, so I'm not going to go back over it. If you haven't listened to the show before, I invite you to go back and listen to some of the episodes about Josh Jacobs. But what I've said is it's a business. We've all talked about it being a business. It's relevant to the conversation. So if you look at Josh Jacobs and you think about what he's done and what he deserves, quote unquote deserves, it goes by the running back market. The running back market is not great. So by waiting for those deals to fall, he's got to hope that those deals fall with Barkley and fall with Dalvin Cook to be able to kind of capitalize and make the market. So if he does wait, as you say, for Cook and Barkley, and those numbers are great, good for Josh Jacobs. But I wonder, Mo, if you think about it, despite those deals, even if those deals happen, do the Raiders pay him? I mean, do you think the way this is being handled, last year they talked about how they loved everybody, and then two of those guys, Derek Carr and Darren Waller, are gone. So this regime, you don't necessarily know how much they think of Josh Jacobs. Obviously, he's a player. He's a great player. He produced for them last year. But what are the chances that the market is set by one of those guys and the Raiders still don't give him a bigger deal?
That's a possibility based on the way Josh McDaniels has handled the running back position with New England. But what I will say is I'll reiterate what I said in a piece a couple of weeks ago, that with Jimmy Garoppolo as your quarterback, Josh Jacobs is even more important, because there's a possibility that Jimmy Garoppolo is going to miss a few weeks during the season, and you're going to have to really depend on the run game for that offense to work like a well-oiled machine. So even with Jimmy Garoppolo on the field, I've said that Jimmy Garoppolo has only been successful with a top 5, top 10 rushing attack. So I think Josh Jacobs is just as important to the Raiders offense, nearly as important to the Raiders offense as Saquon Barkley is to the Giants, and as Derek Carr is to the Titans. Maybe to a lesser extent, because you have Devontae Adams there, you have Jacoby Myers there who understands the system. But as far as being a part of that offense and being the engine of that offense for multiple weeks of the season, I think the Raiders will have to lean on him unless they're ready to unleash Zamir White, Britton Brown, Brandon Bolden, who's like 33 years old. I see them having to work out maybe a middle ground with Josh Jacobs if they want a competitive football team in 2023. Because if he's not there, if he's missing from that offense, that rushing attack isn't going to be what it should be. Right. Which means that they're going to be more defenders playing on their heels and clogging up the passing lanes with Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers and making it hard for Jimmy Garoppolo in the passing game. So if Josh Jacobs isn't on the field week 1, as Tom Pelissero said could happen, prepare for a rocky Raiders offensive season on offense, because it's not going to look the same. It's not going to look anything remotely close to last year.
And you and I talked about on Tuesday's show the fact that we thought Zamir White was going to get a much more even load this year. He didn't get, most carries he had in the game last year was 3. So we know we're going to see more of Zamir White. But there's a big difference in working him more in to produce some balance for Josh Jacobs than there is to say, okay, dude, you're the guy. We got to count on you to carry this team at the running back position when you've only played 1 year and it was sparingly. I mean, to me, that would be the death nail for this offense. And again, I've advocated, as you have, and we've talked about on the show many times. I just mentioned it a minute ago. It's a business. You're not going to overpay for the running back. But if those two running backs you mentioned get a $13 million contract, well, then Josh Jacobs, that's what he's worth. That's what you got to pay him. And I don't see the Raiders moving away from that. If they do, boy, you talk about another optics boo-boo for this franchise. If they were to do that, I think it would be terrible for Raider Nation. I think Raider Nation, already with some drama with the Garoppolo signing and some of the other things that happened, definitely would not warm to this coach anymore or the GM if Josh Jacobs has just said, hey, sorry, play on the tag, we're not paying you.
Here are two scenarios that I think could unfold within the next few weeks. Dalvin Cook signs for a contract that's close to the franchise tag, around $10 million. Give or take $1 or $2 million, under or over that amount, $10.1 million. And Saquon Barkley re-signs with the Giants for about $14 million when it's all said and done, because that's the number that's being thrown out. That the Giants are have an offer on the table that's around $14 million with incentives. So let's say that happens, and the Raiders say, okay, Dalvin Cook is at around 10. Saquon Barkley is around 14. Josh Jacobs will offer you 13, 14 million, and we'll see what he says. And then I think it's more likely that a deal comes to place between the Raiders and Josh Jacobs if that's the scenario that plays out. Saquon Barkley at about 14 and Dalvin Cook at about 10. Now, if Dalvin Cook is well below 10 and Saquon Barkley doesn't sign or signs a deal that's less than 14 million, let's say he signs for a deal that's 12 million, let's say that with incentives, then I think Josh Jacobs winds up reporting to camp and playing on the franchise tag. It says, look, he probably says, look, I want 13, 14 million. I'm going to bet on myself. I'm going to have another big year, and I'm going to test for agency in 2024 and get that big paycheck. We'll see what happens. That's a gamble because the running back position, it may not turn back where they're making a lot of money again. It may be the same issue. The same issue they face this year may be the same issue they face next off season.
Right.
So but I do think it does matter what happens with Dalvin Cook and Saquon Barkley. The difference is right now that there's good news for Dalvin Cook, being that the reports are that he could sign a significant contract. There's good news for Saquon Barkley. There's reports that the Giants and Saquon Barkley are at least communicating about a new deal negotiations. And with Josh Jacobs, you're not hearing anything but cryptic tweets from him. So that's not a good sign for the Raiders and Josh Jacobs and their negotiations. But there's still, about 3 weeks left for them to come to a deal. But I will say it does matter. A lot of people want to say, well, Josh Jacobs is the rushing champion. Why should it matter what the other two guys do? You have to understand with the running back market, as you said, the teams are going to follow the market. Correct. So top tier, if other top tier running backs are getting paid, it gives Josh Jacobs some leverage to say, hey, other top tier guys are getting paid. You got to pay me more because I am the rushing champion. Now, if top tier guys aren't getting paid 10 plus million or 14 plus million, then the Reds could say, look, Dalvin Cook is a 4-time Pro Bowler. Saquon Barkley was the best player, clearly the best player on the Giants offense, and they're not getting 14 million. Right. Josh, you could say Josh Jacobs is the most important player of the offense, but they also have Devontae Adams, the Raiders do. They signed Jacoby Myers. They still have Hunter Renfrow for now. They drafted Michael Mayer. They have other offensive weapons. Correct. So if a team that is heavily reliant on Saquon Barkley is not willing to give him 14 million, then the Raiders are probably not going to give Josh Jacobs 14 million.
Good point. And I think that you look at this situation, and clearly this is the time of the year. And Pelissaro, great reporter, great insider. But this is the time of the year where agents play a lot of games, right? And so to me, this is an agent play story because the agent's basically saying to the Raiders, and he may have said this to the Raiders directly too, which is like, hey, we don't get a deal, we're not coming in, right? That's just the way it's going to be. Mm-hmm. But the Raiders don't have to move. See, that's the point and I think Saquon Barkley and the Giants, an interesting situation. The Cook signing to me is the number one because he's a free agent, right? So he's a free agent. These other two guys, the teams have the upper hand. Now, Barkley has a little bit more of obviously a longer bit of a resume and some accomplishments, what he's done in New York, not to take anything away from Josh Jacobs in the special year he had last year. But to me, the Raiders are going to sit back. They're going to sit and wait for they're not going to set the market. They're going to wait for one of those teams to move, or in this case, it could be 4 or 5 teams because we don't know who Cook is being courted by. So that's why the Raiders, when fans say, pay the guy now, it's like, you can't. It would be stupid to do that because you might give Josh Jacobs a good deal. You might give him a $12.5 million deal, right? If that's where the market's set, and that's great. Everybody feels good about it, walks away. But if you go give him a $14 million deal and Dalvin Cook signs for 9,
right?
That's a fireable offense in my view. So I think everybody's going to be, and I agree with you. I think it could get a little protracted into camp if he doesn't sign, and then you have to start to think about it. But you're right. He's not going to sign a long-term deal for $12 million if somebody else is making 13, or if the market's lower, because why give up the money? Why sign a long-term contract for $2 million more than you're going to earn this year when you might be able to score on it next year, depending what happens. So it'll be interesting. All right. Second news item of 3 here in this opening segment is one that everybody loves to talk about. And Mo, you said it, and I keep saying this was a Nostradamus moment, that when the Derek Carr situation ended for the Raiders, that it would not go away. It's like a bad rash. You put that steroid cream on, it doesn't go away. It just keeps coming back. So Derek Carr at a charity event for the Valley Hospitals, which he does an amazing work for in Fresno, California, his hometown. So kudos to Derek Carr for all he does there for kids in the Valley. Is at a charity event. Anthony Galvez of the Fresno Bee, who covers the Raiders and is in Las Vegas all the time, is there. And of course, the conversation of how the time ends up in Vegas comes up. And I want to pick this apart a little bit. We'll get to his wife crying in a second, but I'm interested in this because everybody, if you've ever had a job and been laid off, fired, or you left because things weren't going well, everybody's got feelings and kind of emotions around their former employer, especially if there was any contention there. So you understand that. But I'm going to read some of this, Mo, and get your reaction. And they asked him about, the fact that he got benched and he couldn't play his final 2 games. And he said he was very upset. I was mad. Then he said, you spend 9 years in a place, you have all the records, and you can play at a high level. And for something to get in the way, whether it was whatever reason, money related or whatever, injury related, I would have said, I don't even want the money. I just want to play 2 more times in front of our fans. I didn't get that opportunity. So it definitely lit a fire inside me to keep going. This is interesting because I look at this, and this is I think textbook Derek Carr. There's nothing that he's saying here that is really new, but it does offer some insight. And some of you will like this take and some of you will not. But he talks about spending 9 years in a place, absolutely loyal guy, was Raiders to the bone. You have all the records and play at a high level. Now, records are individual records, is what he's speaking about, right? I mean, that they didn't win playoff games. They didn't win many seasons. They didn't have winning seasons. So he's talking about that. And then he kind of tries to talk about why it went south. And then he wanted to play 2 times in front of the fans. And of course, we heard, Mo, from a lot of fans who said the same thing. Let him play it out. Let him play it out. But the NFL is a meritocracy. You don't get to just play in front of the fans because you want to. The Raiders made a move. We can argue that all day long. And he said he didn't get that opportunity. So it lit a fire. He got mad about it. But what I don't ever see is the correlation he made in his last statement a couple weeks ago where he said he didn't give the Raiders his best. So I find it curious that he admits, and I gave him credit for that, right? He admitted he didn't play his best. But then he's saying he's mad that he didn't get to play the final 2 games. I have trouble connecting those two, Mo. What do you think?
I think this is a matter of the human side of the situation mixing with reality and not, as you would say, correlating. So the human side of Derek Carr is upset because, as he said, 9 years at the same place, has franchise records, was well respected in the locker room. Let's be honest, he was respected in that locker room, being the longest tenured Raider there, along with, I believe, Sieg, who was replaced also this offseason. But he was respected in the locker room, had the records, had the respect of the loyalty, of the eye of the fans and everything. So I understand the feelings of it. He's mad. I mean, anyone would be mad if they spent 9 years at a place and all of a sudden a new boss comes in and kind of boots you out at the end of your tenure when you know you're probably on the way out anyway. But as you said, it's meritocracy and it's also a business. So I think it was Matt Fallon made this point on Twitter. The Raiders weren't going to risk putting Derek Carr out there for the last 2 weeks and him getting hurt and then being on the hook for the rest of his contract.
Right.
That's the point about this whole thing. You could be mad that the Raiders didn't allow Derek Carr to play out those 2 weeks. I understand. That's the human part of it. But understand that this is the business. The Raiders weren't going to put themselves in a position where they were going to have to pay Derek Carr no matter what if he got hurt. So from a Raiders perspective, you can be mad about what the Raiders did, but from a Raiders perspective, I understand why they did it. It was a business move. They knew they were moving on, and they didn't want to put themselves at financial risk of having to pay him regardless. So that's what they did. So Derek Carr's feelings got hurt. The Raiders made a business decision. That's what happened here.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing too, I want to make a point. I want to give Derek Carr credit too, because he's such a contradiction at times. He will say things like that are very emotional based. And to your point, we're all human beings, so we have feelings. That happens. People get so caught in feelings today. They tend to be the priority number one, even in a business, which isn't always appropriate in my view. But nonetheless, he said also, if you win more games and you keep being productive, you stay there forever. So there's Derek Carr recognizing. He says, but we didn't win enough games. and that stuff kind of happens. Eventually, the last guy in the room is usually going to be out at some point, and that's really what happened. And you know what? That's a great take. So you see, he does understand it, and clearly
Right.
he's going to move on and do well in the worst division in football this year and do good. But then he jokes, survived 20 coaches, and he did criticize in a nice way that by saying that he's now somewhere where there's a stable organization, and he's right about that. I mean, you can't argue with Derek Carr. He's got plenty of responsibility for Raiders' performance on the field, but the Raiders have been, and fans all know this. Raider Nation tells me it every day on Twitter. It's been a disaster in so many ways, and that has been the inconsistency in the front office and whatnot. Lastly, on this was this part that really caught me, and I think really is back to your point about feelings. And we've talked a lot about the complex emotions that Derek Carr shows, and how that a lot of people recognized from the podium over and over again that he's a really sensitive guy, and it's a hard business to be sensitive in. But he was asked from Anthony, what if the Raiders had changed their heart after the last two games and actually wanted to keep him and then brought him back? And he said he would not have done it. And the reason, quote, was, once they made my wife cry, that was pretty much over. Once they made her cry, that was out. So it's interesting because, I've been married 27 years. You mess with my wife, you're going to see the worst of me, right? But in this case, it just perplexed me. And I know a lot of fans out there have been kind of arguing about this online the last few days and saying, well, of course, she's got to move. And then there's other people saying she wasn't crying when she got the paychecks, right? So I think those are two oversimplifications on both sides of the equation there. But it goes back to your point, is it's a tough business, Mo, and families are involved here. Players, the players that are married or players who have girlfriends or who have kids. It means you're changing zip codes, you're changing schools, you're changing lifestyle. You might have lifelong friends that are near you that suddenly now you're across, at least for half the year, you're across country. And so, it made my wife cry thing. I don't know that I would have said that even if it was true, but this is Derek Carr being who he is, isn't it?
It is. That's who he is, and I feel like, okay, I'm not saying that he's fabricating the story. She probably did have hard feelings because, they were part of that they were part of the Raiders organization for so long.
She grew up in it too, yeah.
She also was along with him for the ride. So I get her emotions being attached to this. But what I will say is that I think he was over it once they decided they were ready to move on. Once they benched him, he probably felt the emotion of, wow, I feel betrayed by an organization I gave my blood, sweat, and tears to. And I remember people questioning, is he going to play again, including myself? Because remember, he said that if he's not a Raider, he's going to go play golf and retire. Remember that?
He did. Oh, many times he said that. Yes.
He said, if I'm not playing for the Raiders, I'm going to retire. I'm going to play golf. And I said, and I wrote a piece on Sportsnet. Is Carr now going to go play golf now that the Raiders are clearly going to move on?
Yeah.
And I think it was Hondo Carpenter of Sports Illustrated said, no, he's intent on playing. And it came out that he's got a fire lit under him because of the way it ended. So of course, I think his wife's emotions played into it, but I think most of it was you were dumped by this organization you gave so much to, and now you want to prove that you are better than what you played or what you've shown over the past 9 years with the more stable organization. So I think that's the main factor that's going to be driving him in New Orleans with the Saints, not his wife, though I think his wife emotions did play into it. But I will say that was a juicy quote to put in there to say, hey, you mess with my wife, you make my wife cry. I'm not coming back regardless of what you got to say. But we all know that as a competitor, as a player in the NFL, you are driven by people doubting you, putting you down, or dumping you. Because we hear it so many times. A player gets released, a player gets traded, a player gets moved, and their motivation is, I'm going to prove the previous team that let me go wrong. And I think that's the driving factor here.
Absolutely. And that's it. I mean, look, I know a lot of fans are sick of talking about Derek Carr, but he keeps talking about the Raiders. So we're going to talk about it if he talks about the Raiders. But certainly, again, it was not at all surprising. It was very Derek Carr-ish. I mean, everything he said and how he said it seemed to fit in line with what we've gotten to know over the years as a Raider.
I want to say one thing, because I know she watches our show or listens to it just when Wendy. I know she's been on social Twitter in a way, defending Derek Carr and saying that, he was asked a question by a reporter, so he's answering the question. So I get that part of it. As a person in the media, as people in the media, we both understand. We ask
Mhm.
questions, and players are going to answer. Sometimes they give a cliche answers. Sometimes they give candid answers. So I understand that part of it. This wasn't. I just want to make it clear. This wasn't Derek Carr calling a press conference to talk about the Raiders.
No.
I just want to make that clear on social
Right.
media. He didn't call Anthony Galvitz and say, I want to talk about the breakup between me and the Raiders. He was asked this question because anyone who interviews Derek Carr is going to want to ask about how it ended and his feelings on it. Because if you remember, his brother David said that he was going to have basically a tell-all about what
Yeah.
happened. And we didn't really get the full scope of how it ended and how Derek Carr felt. For a while, Derek Carr kind of went dark where he didn't say much.
Right.
So I think right now when reporters ask him about how it ended, we're getting bits and pieces of his feelings and how it felt. So I just want to make that clarification that we're not bagging on Derek Carr and saying he's gone out here like a scorned ex and talking about the Raiders unprompted. These are questions that he's answering. Now, he could say no comment or I moved on, I don't want to talk about it. He could do that too. But he's choosing to share his mindset on the issue.
And anybody, and again, we live in a time where people see things in social media and they don't even read what they're commenting on.
Right.
And if you read, and I started off this segment, or excuse me, this part of the segment talking about how the room in which he spoke, he was at a charity event and he was talking about it. So to your point, he did not bring it up. It was asked to him by people who donate to the charity. It was like a round table type thing, right? A town hall, whatever you want to call it. So that's a good point to bring up there. All right, we're going to step aside. Nice long first segment there. Wow, had so much to talk about with Jacobs and Carr. Interesting stuff.
We had a grown up conversation about Carr. See, we didn't drag Carr.
No.
I think this is a very fair grown up conversation about it.
And for those of you who want to unsubscribe because we talked about him, I don't know what to tell you. But we certainly appreciate your past support and hope you come back. But anyway, when we come back, Mo, we're going to get into your column on Sports Not Las Vegas Raiders, 3 veterans who face the most pressure ahead of 2023 training camp. And then we'll start the segment, actually, our correspondent, our former producer, now our man on Johnny on the spot around Las Vegas is David Stepanian. He went out and spoke with Max Crosby on Tuesday at a Fanatics Merch Madness event, which I'll tell you a little about when we come back. So we're going to hear that when we come back, and then we'll get into Mo's column. You're listening to Silver and Black Today, an Odyssey original podcast. Don't go anywhere or we'll find you. We roll on here on Silver and Black Today, an Odyssey original podcast covering the Las Vegas Raiders. Make sure you subscribe to the show if you haven't done it, anywhere you get your audio. For those folks watching on YouTube, thanks. And also subscribe and hit the notifications bell. Okay, Mo, earlier this week on Tuesday, the Raiders and Fanatics, Fanatics, the website where you can get all your merchandise and all that stuff, they held a great event and out in Las Vegas, and our David Stepanian went out. We're going to hear that report in a second. But to me, it was a really cool event. There's all these things when you're in the NFL media, you get help for all these events, especially there in Las Vegas. And one of the things that I remember as a kid, and I think we talked about this many, many moons ago on the show, was as a kid, to get your team's jersey, right? To be able to wear, like you grew up in New York as a Raiders fan. I grew up as a Charger fan. And so when you were a little kid, you wanted that jersey of your favorite player. When we were younger, it was still hard to get. It was expensive for your families. But at the same time, today it's even worse, right? You're talking about even replica jerseys run over $100 for kids. And so the Raiders and I think the David will have it in his report, but I think it was 5 NFL teams joined with Fanatics. They brought kids out to the Raiders facility in Henderson to have an event, a football kind of camp event with Max Crosby, but also they got to walk away with some Raiders merchandise. So let's listen to David's report on Merch Madness, a lot of M's there, along with the conversation and the questions David had and asked Max Crosby. So here's David Stepanian out at March. Okay, help me out here, Mo. I can't talk today. No, he's not going to.
It's early morning.
Merch Madness out at Raiders facility. Here's David Stepanian.
It may be June, but the Raiders partnered with Fanatics to hold their first ever March Madness event, with Fanatics donating Raiders gear such as jerseys, shirts, hats, shoes, you name it, to thousands of Las Vegas youth from various organizations. Kids gathered at the Raiders practice facility in Henderson and ran some light drills and had a chance to toss the pigskin with none other than Max Crosby.
At the end of the day, this is my home. I've been here 3 years now, and it's the least I could do. I have so much love for the city, and the city has so much love for me. And I would be doing everybody a disservice if I didn't get back. And that's just as important as anything is giving back to the community and help grow in that relationship. I feel like the biggest myth, once you have more success and things like that, I feel like people always have an out. Like, yeah, I'm busy. And at the end of the day, I'm here like 99% of the time. So why wouldn't I be here? I try to do everything I can as far as, being a player. So I try to do the same thing off the field, be the best version of myself, give back, and show as much love as I possibly can and leave my mark and, just continue building relationships in every way I can.
Dozens of Fanatics employees made the trip to Vegas and, along with Raiders faculty, volunteered to organize the event and get the kids to participate in drills and eat snacks before the end of the day, when each kid got a few pieces of Raider gear to take home.
Yeah, I think they do a great job, all professional leagues, of getting involved and getting players involved in the community, because at the end of the day, like I said, all these kids all have a dream, and most people are scared to go chase their dreams and, don't know what's going to happen and take risk. And these kids have an opportunity to see what it's like to, be around some athletes or be around whatever, like you said, any profession. And hopefully, it could be just one kid that sees that and it makes it, clicks in their brain and be like, listen, I'm going to chase my dream no matter what. And that's how I feel like most people should live, man. You gotta attack life in every way and take a risk and fight for what you want. So, yeah, that's my take on it.
Fanatics teamed up with 7 NFL franchises total, donating over $20 million worth of merchandise to young children across the country and hosting an event that kids won't soon forget. For Silver and Black Today, I'm David Stepanian.
David, thank you for the report there. At Mo, $20 million in merchandise. Now, I was going to say, I'm listening to the story. I think the NFL needs to do more. I'm not saying that they don't do a lot with charity, but I think they need to do more with kids. But man, how easy is it to like Max Crosby? I mean, the guy is just money when it comes to community work that he does and just being genuinely thankful for what has happened to him and how he's been blessed in his life.
I like what he said about being successful. I caught that and it stuck out to me. He said, as people become more successful, they're less available. Or they claim to be less available because they have more things on their plate. But here's Max Crosby. He's one of the top defenders, one of the top overall defenders in the NFL. Mm-hmm. To me, he's a Defensive Player of the Year candidate. If he were on a better team in the past few years, if the Raiders were a playoff squad, he would get more buzz. And here he is at an event where he says, "Look, basically he's saying, I've made the money, I have the numbers, I have the recognition and the respect across the league, and I'm still at these events because it's important that I give back because these fans support me, and he wants to show that he's thankful for all of that. So Kudos to him for just being a good person. And of course, we know his background story. So he's grateful for all that and turning his life around in the process of becoming one of the prominent players in this league. So I think it all ties into one, and it shows his character. And that's the type of player you want in the locker room.
Yeah, and check out the pictures up on Raiders.com of those kids out there, man. I mean, you talk about smiles from this end to this end. I mean, it was huge, and it just made me feel really good, warmed my heart to see those kids walk away with Raider gear that they might not be able to get. Especially, the times are tough right now financially for a lot of people, but for those kids, especially at-risk youth, and what they're dealing with, to be able to hang out with him and in the Raiders facility and then walk away with a jersey and footballs and hats and stuff like that. Amazing stuff. So thanks to the folks out at Fanatics for inviting us out there, and thanks to David Stepanian, our correspondent, for the report. All right, we're going to get into now a discussion around Mo's latest column, which if you're watching us on YouTube, you'll see up on the screen, up on sportsnaut.com, where he is the Raiders columnist. By the way, follow him on Twitter at Moe Moton, Moemoton. And Mo, you went through this column that ran on Tuesday talking about 3 veterans who face the most pressure ahead of 2023 training camp. And there's a big video there from the Sports Not folks about Jimmy Garoppolo, but that's not one of the guys you talk about, although you could certainly say that he's in the same bucket. But let's talk through this column now and what you had to say here. And the first guy you start with, and by the way, all 3 of the guys you mentioned, one of us picked as one of our pick to click guys. So you obviously have some optimism around some of them. But let's walk through this. And the linebacker position for the Raiders is still a black hole. They need someone somewhere to step in and make some plays and show that they're ready to take that next step up. You start with Divine Diablo. Talk a little bit about Divine Diablo and why you have him on this list of the 3 players.
Right. So in our last episode, Silver Black Today, Devon Diablo was one of my picks to click the Raiders defense, simply because now this is second year in Patrick Graham's scheme. In the same token, while I think he's a pick to click, I also think he's under a lot of pressure, because if he shows up to training camp in the first couple of weeks of training camp, he doesn't look as good as they expect him to look, having the green dot or being the lead guy at the linebacker position, they're probably going to go out and sign another veteran. And I suggested Kyle Van Noy is probably going to be that guy if they were to sign a veteran linebacker. Of course, I've been screaming week after week, trade for Patrick Queen if he's available. Trade for Patrick Queen if he's available. But for now, the Raiders don't seem that interested in getting an established starting linebacker. They seem to feel like Devon Diablo could be that guy, and they seem to be confident in him because, as I said in the piece, they signed Robert Spillane, and he has a modest contract, and they waited to the 6th round to draft the linebacker. So what that tells you is Devon Diablo is that guy. I'm not saying they're handing him the starting position. I'm not saying they're handing him the green dot role, but he's the leader in that clubhouse right now, barring another move the Raiders make for a veteran player. So Devon Diablo is under a lot of pressure, because if he doesn't perform up to par, then what do the Raiders have at linebacker? Who's going to be their starting guy? Devon Diablo is underwhelming through the summer. The Raiders are going to have to scramble either through the trade market, through the free agent market, or someone who's cut at the end of August, early September. They're going to have to pick him up and plug him into that defense, because they're going to need a lot of help at that position. It's going to have to come from someone other than Devon Diablo, but he's under pressure to be that guy this year at the linebacker position.
There you go. And yes, somebody please step up at linebacker, or it could be a really rough year. We're going through Mo's column here as well, and despite his lack of appreciation for avocados, the next player you talk about is offensive tackle Jermaine Illuminor, who was one of our pick to clicks for both of us as well. When you talk about him being on this list of veterans with prove it type years, and might be prepared to do that, why Jermaine Illuminor, and what does he have to do to kind of solidify that position and really take the next step in his career?
So on one side, Jermaine Illuminor played well as a first-time, full-time starter, right? He took advantage of his opportunity to start. Him and Dale Mumford were alternating snaps there, or drives, I should say, at the beginning of the season. He eventually took over that starting role. He didn't allow a sack after week 3. He only allowed 1 sack after week 3. He allowed 3 sacks in total. The Raiders re-signed him to a deal. It wasn't a lucrative deal, but they did re-sign him. But the reason he shows up in this piece as a player under a lot of pressure is because the Raiders were going to replace him. If you remember Peter King's piece, Peter King spent the first night with the Raiders in their draft room. The Raiders had Paris Johnson Jr. of Ohio State as one of their top 4 draft prospects, but the Arizona Cardinals traded up over the Raiders. They swapped with the Detroit Lions, who had the 6th spot, and they selected Paris Johnson Jr. So if the Cardinals hadn't traded up, the Raiders might have drafted Jermaine Illuminor's replacement. Now, they didn't draft a tackle for the rest of the draft. They didn't sign a high-priced free agent, so Jermaine Illuminor essentially gets another chance to show why he's a star in this league. But if you look at it and say, well, if things have fell a different way, he may have been competing at the guard spot. So the Raiders don't seem completely sold on Jermaine Illuminor based on Peter King's report that they were going to draft. They were going to start their draft with a tackle. So he has still more to prove, even though he had a pretty good year last year. And I think he even admits this on social media. He's very active on social media. Shout out to Jermaine Illuminor, the main show on Twitter. He says this is only the beginning. This is only the start. And he actually, if you see the piece, he actually replied to me in one of my tweets, and he said, look, he understands the penalties happen, but it's not going to be a problem going forward. And that's one of the things that I think we're looking at for him to improve in 2023 is, can he cut down on the penalties? Because he had 10 last year. Colton Miller and Dylan Parham only had 5, and they were tied for second on the team. So that's one thing where it's one area where Jermaine Illuminar can improve. He understands that, and I'm sure he's worked on that this offseason. He plans to not have that be a problem. And if that's not a problem and he's still solid in pass protection and his run blocking, I do think he gets a multi-year lucrative contract where the Raiders don't think about replacing him next offseason.
Absolutely. That consistency he's spoken about so many times in interviews and on his social media handles as well. So there you go, Jermaine Illuminor. Number 3 is another guy that I picked to click. You weren't so certain on him. So let's talk about him. That's safety Trayvon Moehrig in his 3rd year now, kind of a make or break. I agree with that. He's either going to return to form like he did in year 1 and get better at creating turnovers and being a ball hawk, or he could go the other way. Talk us through Trayvon Moehrig, what we have to see, and what the kind of pressure on him is at the safety role.
Merrick's in the same boat as Divine Diablo, where they haven't had consistency with defensive play calling. So they were drafted to a team that had Gus Bradley as the defensive coordinator. Of course, Gruden's coaching staff out of the door after his email scandal, and Josh McDaniels brings in his staff. So now they had to play under a new system under Patrick Graham last year. So that could be a part of why Merrick struggled last year. But also, and you talked about this in the last show, he talked about focusing on film study or studying more film. And I think that's going to be part of his growth, being a student of the game and understanding his role in Patrick Graham's system. Now, I like the fact that he didn't point to defensive play calling and inconsistencies as part of the reason why he struggled last year. He put it on himself, self-accountability. He said, look, I got to study more. I got to get in the film room more, basically. And I have to be a better player based on what I see on film and correcting some of my mistakes. So he's in an interesting situation because right now, as of today, I don't think there's a player that's going to leapfrog Trayvon Merrick on the depth chart. They signed Marcus Epps, but Marcus Epps has only started 1 full year with the Philadelphia Eagles. He was a special teamer for most of the time in Philadelphia. They did move up for Chris Smith II in the draft, but this is a 5th-round pick we're talking about. 5th-round picks aren't expected to start day 1, though I do think Chris Smith could take over a starting role. That's not the expectation, whereas Trayvon Merrick was drafted in the 2nd round. The expectation for that player is to be a starting quality player by year 3. So that goes into my point that Merrick is under the pressure where this is a critical year for him. Now he's in the same defensive system as he was last year. So for consecutive years, he has the same system, same scheme. He has to perform because if he doesn't, the Raiders can call Daron Harmon back. Daron Harmon is still a free agent. Josh Johnson III, who I suggested in the piece, is also still available. And he has the versatility to play that hybrid safety slot cornerback role as he's done with the Cleveland Browns and the Los Angeles Rams. So there are quality players available or veteran-savvy players available that can play, that Graham can plug and play into the system if Merrick has a disappointing showing through in camp. So he necessarily isn't going to lose his spot to Epps or Smith. He may if he underperforms, but he also has to compete with a couple of free agents, some veteran guys who have a lot more experience than he does.
Yeah, and I think it's a good situation because this is where the rubber meets the road. You got to get out there and show what you got. I think he bounces back. And I'd like to see him bounce back. It works out better for the Raiders, especially the contract he's under right now, and then you don't have as much work. But clearly, they have some doubts because they want to see a lot of competition there. And that maybe they have less doubt than I'm thinking, and they just want to push him to be the best that he can be. So we'll have to see. Make sure you go up and read Mo's piece up on sportsnot.com. If you don't already, go read the site. You can see it up there as well. We have it on the screen if you're watching us on YouTube, but check out Mo's Twitter handle where he links to all his stories as we do too. And that is when we have access to our Silver and Black Today Twitter handle, Mo. I hadn't talked to you about this, but I got a new phone. So I go to log in the account and I have our producer. They post stuff there for us as well. And I changed the password. It prompted me to change the password, and then it says, well, this is a suspicious login. So we need to text you something. So I said, okay. So the text never comes. So then I reach out to Twitter and 4 days later, and I still don't have an answer. So anyway, we will usually tweet out Mo's stories from Silver and Black Today. I tweet them out. He tweets them out. Look for this one up there. And if you know Elon Musk, tell him to fix our Twitter handle.
We're not high enough on the totem pole. We can reach out directly to Elon Musk.
No, but we do pay the $8 a month.
Snap.
So we should get some kind of customer service. My God. Anyway. All right. That's going to close out segment number 2. When we come back, it's time to talk to you. It's time for the Raider Nation mailbag. On this late week edition of Silver and Black Today, an Odyssey original podcast. Mo and I will be back right after these words, and we'll hear your words right here on Silver and Black Today. Welcome back. It is the home stretch here on Silver and Black Today, an Odyssey original podcast covering the Raiders. My co-host is Mr. Moe Moton. He's a national NFL columnist and writer at Bleacher Report, also known as Midtown Mo. You can also catch his Raider-specific content up on sportsnot.com, where he writes a column there once a week. Follow him on Twitter at Moe Moton, Moemoton. I am at LV Gully. The show is SNB Today, although we can't answer you from there until Elon Musk fix it for us, so we'll get there eventually. But Mo, I got to say this, there's a heat wave, not in the Northeast or in the Midwest where we're at. This smoke from Canada continues to cloud our skies. But out in California, they're having a major heat wave. But I want to read, this is from the city of Las Vegas. You ready? The new Las Vegas record has been set. And it's not for heat, by the way. As of Tuesday, Las Vegas had not reached 100 degrees for 291 straight days. Breaks the all-time longest streak of consecutive days below 100, set in 1964 and 1965. And that's thanks to the folks over at the National Weather Service in Las Vegas, which is a great Twitter handle. If you go to Las Vegas at all, follow them. They're really great. It's cool stuff, and it's funny a lot of the times too. But, dude, it hasn't even hit 100. It is the end of June. And having lived there twice, Mo, usually you're going to get 100, late May, early June. So they're like a full month behind. And 4th of July was always one of the hottest periods of the year. So crazy. Maybe the Raiders can heat it up, or maybe because they haven't brought in their quarterback yet, or Josh Jacobs, and maybe that's why it's so cool there. Things are a little icy.
I say that's good news for me if I'm, planning on a trip to Vegas, because if you know me, I don't like the heat. Once it gets over 80 degrees, I'm like, look, I need to hibernate or something. But who knows? Maybe I'll swing by Vegas now that it seems to be a little cooler over there. They have a little under 100 degree streak going. Maybe I'll sneak over to Vegas and hang out a little bit. So if anybody's in Vegas, convince me to go over there and hang out in the lesser hot sun.
Yes, although people on the far east side of Vegas, shout out to Sunrise Mountain and folks out there up on Hollywood, all that stuff, they have had 100 degrees. So the temperature is taken at the airport, which is right in the middle of the valley, right near the Strip. Now, if you go out west to the Summerlin area, out there as well, or northwest Las Vegas, it's actually cooler because it's higher elevation. So if you're on the east side, you're like, what are you talking about? It's been like 103 here for the last 10 days. So there is a little bit of that there. But you're right. It's not global warming anymore. I know they call it climate change, but the climate change in Vegas, it's getting cooler over the past several years. It's actually gotten warmer because of the construction. There's more concrete, just, that concrete effect that happens. So, but yeah, Mo, you get out there, get a little avocado smoothie on the Strip, people watch.
Hang out at the airport a little bit,
Hang out at the airport.
Hitchhiking at the airport.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
Pick me up.
We got listeners who pick you up. You wouldn't need to hitchhike. Okay. It is our favorite time of the week when we get into our mailbag segment here on the Raider Nation Mailbag. Oh, that's Mo's theme.
Raider Nation is never shy. You ask, we answer. It's time for the Raider Nation Mailbag. What's on your mind, fam? Drop us an email at mail@silverandblacktoday.com. That's mail@silverandblacktoday.com. Now, it's your time to speak up.
All right, there. So you go. It's time for the Raider Nation Mailbag. You heard mail@silverandblacktoday.com, mail@silverandblacktoday.com, or tweet at Mo or I or the show, and we can get your question there as well. Okay, so our good friend, serial emailer, and we love him for it, Gary Harkin Reader, but I'm thinking, Mo, we should start calling him Gary Harkin Writer.
Ah, look at that.
Is that too much of a dad joke?
Look at that. Look, no, that's actually pretty good.
You like
he
that?
may not like it because you name flipped him, but
well, it's Gary Gary, air quotes, Harkin writer, close air quotes, Harkin reader. All right. So here's what he says, and his message is always a bit longer, but we like him. And he actually shortened up a little bit. He's listening to me. So he says, "Hey, Scott, saw the show. Great as always." He's talking about our last show. "My cracked crystal ball says the Raiders don't sign Marcus Peters until they trade Josh Jacobs." Trade Josh Jacobs. Whoa. Similar situation with HR. Raiders aren't trading Hunter Renfrow. Raiders aren't trading Hunter. They need the defensive backs to work against him, iron sharpening iron. Then after camp, depending on injuries, he could be traded. We've talked about that actually too. I can see that happening. The Raider regime is system-oriented. With players that Ziegler brings in, it's up to the coaching staff to get the most out of those players. Player signings will be a function of injury and who doesn't rise as the cream of the crop. This is what he says. "My crystal ball says we need another proven edge rusher, and we need to sign a linebacker, yes, and a USFL quarterback is signed. Based on Ziegler and McDaniel's philosophy, it's system first and money second." And he quotes Al Davis, "The fire that burns brightest is the will to win." And Ziegler's addendum to that is, "and to play for what we're willing to pay." So there's Gary Harkin writer, writing to us again. So Mo, he's got a good point there about the trades, right? So Josh Jacob trade, yeah, we'll see what happens with that. But the Hunter Renfrow situation, we talked about before June 1st, but you get through camp, and we've said that all along as a caveat, right? Which is the market for Hunter Renfrow might not be huge right now, but somebody goes down in practice on another team, somebody needs a player, then suddenly the market heats up and the Raiders can deal him at a different time, including during camp or after camp.
I don't want to bury the lead here. Gary Harkin reader dropped an idea bomb on us. Trade Josh Jacobs before they sign Marcus Peters would be very interesting. I will say that I think fans would be both excited and disgusted at the same time if those two events happen within a week of each other. They'll be happy to have Marcus Peters, but they're like, why is it cost us Josh Jacobs? And I think that actually Marcus Peters will be there. If the Raiders are going to sign him, he'll be there before camp because they want him to get him in there, get his feet wet in the system, whatever, as the summer rolls on. But I think that the interesting part about Gary Harkin reader's prediction is that this July 17th deadline is going to obviously come about 2 weeks before camp. So we're going to know before camp, if the Raiders situation with Josh Jacobs is going to reach rocky waters, because if he doesn't have a new contract by then, it's a possibility that Josh Jacobs may not be at camp or he may be there and just not participating. And then I think they still make a move for Marcus Peters. But I think it's going to take some time. If they're going to trade Josh Jacobs, I do think it's going to take some time for them to find a trade partner, because teams understand that Josh Jacobs won a new deal. So they're going to be hesitant to maybe to acquire him because of the money situation.
Right.
So we have to look at the landscape. What teams were interested in Dalvin Cook may also be interested in Josh Jacobs based on fit and money. So we'll see what happens there. But I think it takes some time. And once that deadline passes, it passes. They're not going to come to a deal with him. Josh Jacobs either plays on a franchise tag or he holds out or holds in, whatever the case may be. So I think the Marcus Peters thing happens within another maybe 2 weeks, because we all know veterans like to skip the spring workouts and they like to skip the first part of the offseason because they're experienced guys. They're like, we don't need non-padded practices. They come around, the Jadeveon Clowneys of the world, the Marcus Peterses of the world, they're going to wait till late July to sign. I think that's Marcus Peters' timeline, regardless of what happens with Josh Jacobs.
And Gary's point about trading Josh Jacobs, and you just mentioned it too, is that's a situation where if they're going to trade him, there has to be permission allowed and conversations that happen between the player, his agent, and the new team to sign that long-term deal, because he's not going to want to be traded unless he's getting a new deal somewhere, because that's what he wants in Las Vegas too. And hopefully that's what happens for everybody's sake. But if it doesn't happen, then you got to find that partner. That partner's then got to negotiate. So then there's still negotiation, which is why I think it doesn't happen before camp. If they don't sign him to the deal by the 17th, then they're going to have to start that process if that's what they do. And that could take longer. So we'll see what happens. But to your point about veterans not having to be in camp, same with Josh Jacobs, especially a running back. He's not going to take a lot of hits anyway, so you don't want to do that. So good stuff.
So just to be clear, it would be a sign and trade situation where Josh Jacobs signs his franchise tag. A new team acquires him with the understanding that next year they plan on signing him to a new deal because, again, with that deadline passing, he would have to play out and he would have to understand that, okay, this new team is going to invest in me eventually, and that's why I'm going there. So there has to be some conversations 3 ways between Jacobs, the Raiders, and that new team, as you just said.
Right, and there's some risk in that too, right? Because they agree in principle to a deal, but they can't sign a new contract because he will be under a current contract. To your point about the deadline of the 17th, so that's really interesting. That's why it behooves everybody to get a deal done before the 17th. All right, Gary, as always, my friend, thank you so much for your question and for the thought-provoking discussion that you just started with Mo and I about a Josh Jacobs trade. Okay. We move on to email number 2. This comes from Anastasia in Las Vegas. And it has to do with dating Mo. No, I'm just kidding. She's like, can you give me Mo's phone number? No,
Stop.
Just kidding. All right, here's what she says. And I'm going to try to read it like I think she would be saying it. I'm not going to do a falsetto. I'm not going to do a falsetto. Enough of Derek Carr already. Okay, that was the part. Why does he have to keep talking about the Raiders? He's gone. Move on. Now he's starting to annoy me. Again, that's Anastasia in Las Vegas. Thank you for listening to the show. We don't get
very short and sweet.
It was short. She was just mad. She must have been listening to the show and then heard the email address and said, "I'm going to talk to these guys." But I think we talked about it in the first segment a little bit, which was he did not initiate the discussion around it. It wasn't like he was going out and saying, all right, now I want to dish on the Raiders. He was at a charity event in Fresno talking, and somebody asked him a question about it, so he answered it. So now you could still argue enough already. Why are you talking about it? You could have answered it differently. I'm not going to make that argument for him or for you, but I want to make that clear, Anastasia. And I know that everybody's tired of talking about him, but until 2 things happen, one of 2 things, I should say, Mo, until Derek Carr completely fails and proves all the people who hate him right, this will continue. And then if he does really well in New Orleans and, for example, wins a Super Bowl, then it'll end it for some, but for the others, it will not. So I don't think it ever ends. It never ends.
No, Scott, Anastasia, if you're listening out there, believe me when I say this. This is not going to end until Derek Carr retires.
Correct.
Because his career now in New Orleans is going to be compared to his career at the Raiders. So when Derek Carr, regardless of what he does with the Saints, when you watch games, they're going to put Derek Carr's first year with the Saints side by side with his first year with the Raiders. They're going to put his first 3 years with the Saints side by side with his first 3 years with the Raiders. Now, I say that's an unfair comparison because Derek Carr is much younger as a Raider than he is now. He's an experienced veteran, so I don't think the stats are even comparable. But everything that he does in New Orleans is going to be compared to what he did in Oakland and Las Vegas, and there's no way to escape that. And reporters are always going to ask him about the Raiders. And I think for the first year outside of being in Las Vegas, reporters are always going to ask him, well, how does that compare to your time with the Raiders? Or how does that compare to your time with Las Vegas? Because he was with the Raiders for so long. Reporters are going to glean on to the obvious questions. Sure. How does this compare to your last stop? Or how, what about when you were?
And those are valid, Mo. Those are valid questions for a guy who spent his whole career somewhere.
They are valid questions from a reporter's perspective, but I understand it from a fan's perspective and Anastasia's perspective, saying I'm just done with it. I want to move on. I think this is also Murph's perspective over at Raider Fan Radio that he's no longer a Raider, so I no longer care about what Derek Carr does. And I do understand that perspective from fans. They're just ready to move on. But just understand, if you follow the NFL in any capacity, the comparisons are going to be made because they're going to say, well, if Derek Carr succeeds, they're going to say, well, the Raiders were the team organization that was holding him back. If he fails or comes up short, underwhelms with the New Orleans Saints, they're going to say, well, this wasn't totally a Raiders issue. This is just who Derek Carr is. He's a mediocre B, C- quarterback.
And not only that, but every Raider quarterback that plays this year, because there will be multiple, the graphic will pop on the screen. Yep. Here's the Raiders through 4 games last year with Derek Carr. Here's the Raiders this 4 week through Jimmy Garoppolo, Chase Garbers. No, I'm just kidding. Aiden O'Connell, or Brian Hoyer. Right.
Oh my gosh, Chase
Don't get us
Garbers.
started on the Garbers conversation. But you're right. Both sides are going to be, especially in year one, it will be. So if you're sick of hearing about Derek Carr, then either you got to completely check out and not watch any Raiders football, or you just have to deal with it, because that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So it's a
For
good
the
point.
for at least the first year, you're
First
gonna
year.
have to deal with it. The second
Correct.
year, it'll die down, but this first year without him, it's going to be comparisons nonstop.
Correct. And to your point, until he retires, there will be always the connection because he played 9 years. All right. Thank you, Anastasia, for offering a female anger point of view to the Las Vegas Raiders discussion here on the podcast. But we appreciate you listening. All right. Our last email comes to us from Dennis out in Walnut Creek. He's written into the show, I think, maybe last month. Okay, Mo, the first part of Dennis's question, or I should say it was a statement where he called Josh Jacobs stupid. I'm just kidding. But he said it would be stupid for him to hold out. And he said $10 million, which means Josh Jacobs would hold out and not play the entire year. You look at this, and we've talked about it ad nauseum today, but you look at this and the situation with Josh Jacobs trying to get what he feels is due. Understand that he's got to represent himself. His agent has to do that. Is this going to be the best tactic? And my answer to that question, before you give yours, is if it works, it's a freaking brilliant move. If it doesn't work and he loses $10 million, it's a dumbass move. It's amazing how the fine line between those two can be there.
Hindsight's always 20/20, right?
Yes.
No, but to just to give a prediction on this, I actually don't think Josh Jacobs sits out the entire season. I think that, remember, I gave out 2 scenarios, and I believe the first or second segment, I think it was the first segment, that Dalvin Cook and Saquon Barkley signed for $10 and $14 million respectively, and then Josh Jacobs comes to an agreement with the Raiders for about 13, 14 million. But if Saquon Barkley doesn't come to an agreement with the Giants and he has to play on a franchise tag, and Dalvin Cook gets less than 10 million, then I think Josh Jacobs comes back and says, look, the market for the running backs, well, his agent probably says, look, Jacobs, the market for the running back is not improving right now. So you're going to have to basically bet on yourself and hope that in 2024, you're in a better situation to make more money, because if Saquon Barkley is in a holding pattern with the Giants and Dalvin Cook has an underwhelming deal, even though reports say that he has a significant contract on the table, contract offer, that is, if those two are underwhelming on the market, then Josh Jacobs is not going to all of a sudden make 14, 15 million. It's just not going to happen that way. Because
Right.
as you said, as you highlighted, the Raiders are going to follow the trend of the market. If other teams aren't paying top tier running backs, then the Raiders aren't going to do it. And I think Josh Jacobs' agent, assuming he's a smart guy or woman, whoever is advising him, understands that. And I think he's going to have to wind up betting on himself at the very least. So he's going to have the 1 year, $10.1 million contract fully guaranteed, and then he'll look to hit the market in 2024. So I think that's in play. I don't think it comes to a point where he takes the Le'Veon Bell route, because it is a copycat league, and we did see what happened with Le'Veon Bell. He never really recovered after that holdout year. And I'm not saying that that's going to be the same situation for Josh Jacobs, different player, different person. But when you see a player take a certain route that's not taken by anyone else, you're not eager to take the same route if it didn't work out for that player.
Right. Yeah. And I know it seems dire to fans because of the Pelissaro part we talked about earlier, because of Josh Jacobs' tweets, and it's all negative. But I really I feel pretty confident, Mo, that they'll work something out before the 17th. And even if they don't, I see Josh Jacobs in camp, even if he holds in a little bit to that point, trying to do something. I think you just don't want to do that. You want to get in there and show that you're going to play and that you're going to make your money. But again, so much of it is out of his hands. It depends on the market. It depends on Cook. It depends on Barkley. So we'll have to see.
Really quick, Scott. These are my top. I will rank the top 3 playout scenarios that I think will play out the Josh Jacobs Raiders situation. 1, he gets the franchise. He plays out the end of the franchise tag. 2, he gets a multi-year deal, and that will be after Dalvin Cook and Saquon Barkley get their deals. 3, I think he's traded. So that's how it ranked the outcome of how this is going to pan out.
Yeah, I think that's
plays
fair.
out the franchise, plays out the end of the franchise tag, gets a new deal, and then gets traded. Way down at 5 or 6 is him holding out for the whole year when he doesn't play. I just don't see that happening.
Yeah. And I would imagine his agent would not advise that either. Players sometimes will go against what their agents advise them to do because they get to make the decision. They're the boss. But I don't see that. I think Josh Jacobs is a smart kid. He's a great emerging leader, and I just don't see him doing that. I see them hopefully working something out, so we'll have to see. But Dennis, thanks for the note. We appreciate it. Bunch of Josh Jacobs stuff. See people, you see the undercurrent there. They're concerned with what's going on, and I don't blame them for that, Mo. But I think that everything's going to work out pretty well. I think we'll see. We'll see how it rolls down. Mo, what do you got coming up? I know here we are sitting on a Thursday. You got anything coming this weekend, or what can people look forward to early next week as far as what you're doing up at Bleacher Report or Sports Not?
I'll be posting some pictures of me on vacation on the beach playing volleyball with a bunch of people. That's where I'm going to be doing for the next week or so.
Nice.
In all honesty, I have one more vacation. I know people are like, Mo's on vacation a lot now.
No.
Like, okay, I have one more vacation coming up before the grind. You know, it picks up for me around the 24th of July. So I have one last vacation from late June into the 4th of July where I get to kind of kick back and just kind of relax, reload, recharge the batteries and get back at it. But then I'm gonna leave this Raider conversation as a TBD. I'm still thinking about what I'm gonna put up at Sportsnet. There will be a column up on Sportsnet, a Raiders column up on Sportsnet next week. I'm just not sure where I'm headed yet. I want to clear my head on my vacation, come back with a clear mind, and I'll think of something creative. I don't like to do I know a lot of fans like the position breakdown and we're gonna do that too. But everyone does that. And when I write my columns, I like to give fans something fresh, something different, something creative that they can hang on to.
Can I make a recommendation?
Go ahead.
3 reasons why Chase Garbers will be the starter in Las Vegas.
Oh my gosh. Can we get like 1 minute on this? For the Chase Garbers people out there, I said on Twitter on Tuesday night, if Chase Garber starts one NFL game, not in the USFL, not in Arena Football, not in any other league. If he starts one NFL game in 2023, I will eat cheesecake on air on this show. And I'll stick to my word because when I lost to Scott in fantasy football, I ate mint chip ice cream on this show already.
This you did.
I'm willing to live up to my bets and my words. If Chase Garber starts one NFL game, I will eat some cheesecake on air. That's how confident I am. Because if you know me, you know I hate cheesecake. So this is how confident I am that Chase Garbers is not going to start a game.
You hate cheesecake, but you've been on this rampage against mint again. It's an unmitigated social media rampage by Mo.
Someone
Mad Mo.
Someone triggered me with the mint chip stuff, but Chase Garbers is QB4 right now. The Raiders signed Jimmy Garoppolo, and I get Jimmy Garoppolo's hurt a lot.
He's so QB 4.5.
Exactly. Now,
if Devontae Adams could play quarterback better.
Now I know Vinny Bonsignor said that, Chase Garbers isn't just a camp arm. He's been developing under Josh McDaniels, and I get it. He's Vinny's a great reporter, and we get it. Chase Garbers has been around. But even if Jimmy Garoppolo is hurt and they have to let go of Jimmy Garoppolo, they have Brian Hoyer there who knows the system. And they moved up in the 4th round for Aiden O'Connell for a reason. So those two guys will be in the pecking order above Chase Garbers, who went undrafted a couple of years ago, I believe. So Chase Garbers, for the Chase Garbers fan club out there, I'm sorry you're offended by this comment. He's not going to start a football game this year. And I'm so confident he's not going to start a football game this year that I'm willing to
cheesecake.
Eat a disgusting piece of cheesecake if he does.
Listen, he might be a really nice young man, and I have nothing against him personally, but Chase Garbage from a play perspective. Not Garbers, garbage. Boy, man, people, people are like, it's like an addict. You're, and I don't mean to make light of addiction at all, but I'm saying you're so addicted to football and Raiders football that you're starting to get delusional talking about Chase Garbers. That's what some folks are doing. I know I've been there with other teams that I follow and stuff, baseball, things like that. What if we did this? Yeah, just let it go. Just with Chase Garbers, just let it go.
You know what I noticed though, and this is not just with Raider fans. This is across the board because I've covered the Giants in a previous life. I've covered the Pittsburgh Steelers, and fans across the board do this.
Yes,
they have a tendency to take a player who's on the fringe and pump up that player. I don't know. I think it's the underdog type of thing where
absolutely
fans see themselves. A lot of people see themselves as an underdog, so they want to see the underdog succeed. So they'll pick the guy who's a fringe player, fringe roster guy, and say that guy's gonna make noise. And then
Yeah.
if that guy does turn into something, that fan can say, "See, I saw it before everyone else." You know, and
Yeah.
and I think that's part of
That's
why
right.
people pump up these players who are just in obscure spots on the depth chart. Chase Garbers being one of them. I just don't think, and the same thing goes for Isaiah Pola-Mao. If you look at Twitter, a lot of Raiders fans like Isaiah Pola-Mao, and I think we had a question about him recently. They email access to. I think it might have been Garoppolo's hair. It might have been him asking about Pola-Mao. I may be mistaken, but one of our emailers said, "Do you think Pola-Mao is going to make some noise this year?" Because they thought that he was going to play a big role in defense. And I said, he's going to have a big offseason to make that jump because I just don't see it from him. But to my greater point that fans are like to attach themselves to these underdogs and hope that they succeed. And I get that part of it, but not to crush anyone. Garbers isn't going to be that guy. It's just not going to happen for him.
Yeah, we as Americans especially, we love the underdog. We love, especially in sports, we love the player who has some sort of potential. Because potential means you haven't failed yet, particularly, right? It does. I mean, look, I remember as a kid rooting for backup quarterbacks. And if he could just play, and then he eventually plays, and you're like, oh, he's not very good. And fans will turn on you like that because they'll root for you. They'll say, give him a chance, and then he goes out and lays an egg, and it's like, this guy sucks. Get him out of there. So we
remember
are
Matt
fickle.
McGloin?
Oh, Mac McGloin. Oh boy. Yes, and there's a slew of guys that have come through the Raiders organization the last couple of years. Go back to Chris Warren, the third. Yeah, second. Sorry, third. Great example. Hell, why isn't this guy? We have our running back. Yeah, didn't work out very well. So that happens, and the defensive backfield has happened a bunch too. So, but anyway, we talk about it here. All right, Mo, enjoy some of your beach time and your mint chip gelato time.
Oh.
Sorry.
Chip gelato.
Get some coffee gelato, we'll call it even. And have some fun with that. But we will be back on Tuesday. All right. So enjoy your time, my friend. I appreciate you.
Yep. So for the people out there, don't expect any pictures of any mint chip or cheesecake photos. It'll be some good food, good snacks, good desserts, actually. Some edible stuff, not the stuff that you guys consume that ruins your inside. So expect that from me.
That blocks it all up. Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
That's right. All right, man. We'll talk to you next week. All right. For Mike Robier, our producer, for Moe Moton, I am Scott Gulbransen. Make sure you subscribe to the show wherever you get your audio. Also, if you're watching us on YouTube, hello. Make sure you hit subscription and the notifications bell. Until Tuesday, enjoy your weekend, Raider Nation. We will talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.